And once we start, we're just going to ask everyone to put themselves on mute.
How many are signed in today?
We had 88 registered. Right now we have about 50. And we have more folks joining us as we go here.
That's really impressive.
All right, Claire, you're ready to go.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm Claire Lillis.
Claire, you're muted.
You muted yourself, Claire.
Okay, somebody muted me. I didn't. Good morning. I'm Claire Lillis with We've got some pounding going on outside as they're repairing some siding. Anyway, I'm Claire Lillis. I am the co-chair along with Emia Nazarenia with the District 5960 Human Trafficking Task Force. We are so glad to have all of you here and so many people. So we'll get started with it. Sex trafficking, as you know, is rampant in the United States, but remains an extremely complicated and overwhelming subject for many. Many of us don't want to admit it. However, once you understand what sex trafficking truly looks like, your eyes will be open to the abuse of women and children throughout your community, empowering you to help. Our speaker has used her experience both as a victim and an advocate to teach thousands of people across the country about the reality of domestic sex trafficking in the United States. Kimberly Mull is a sex trafficking survivor turned policy expert and victims' rights advocate. With over 10 years of experience, she has helped over 400 trafficking victims through direct services or resources, and lobbied for dozens of anti-trafficking and anti-violence against women and children laws around the country. She has a master's degree in services management and is recognized nationally as a policy expert in the anti-sex trafficking movement. Her consulting business, Kimberly Mull Advocacy and Consulting, is based in Las Vegas, Nevada, and assists organizations and governmental agencies better their policies and practices around sex trafficking, sex violence. She is currently working on a book based on her experiences to radically shift America's view of sex trafficking. And before we go any further, I just remind you, you can ask questions via chat, and at the end of the session, I'll feed those back to Kimberly as we move forward. She happened to share with me, as we've had a couple of conversations in the last few weeks, that she has a real passion for Rotary and what it has done for her life. So I would ask you to welcome Kimberly Mull. Kimberly, you may want to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Hey, can you hear me? Can I get a thumbs up? Oh, I'm large now, so I think that means you can see me. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen with y'all. So anytime before I give a presentation, I start by giving a trigger warning. This is just to let anyone know that what I talk about is the uncomfortable, and it's the thing that can make anyone, no matter if you've experienced anything personally or not, feel anxiety or other kinds of emotions. So if you get any kind of anxiety, flashbacks, anger, sadness, anything to that extent, feel free to mute me, to play with your phone, to step out for a second. That's perfectly acceptable, and do whatever self-care things that you need. So the first time I thought that I was pregnant, I curled up against my bedroom door, crying. With this hand, I repeatedly punched myself in the stomach, trying to make a baby that didn't exist come out. And in this hand, I held my teddy bear because I was 12 years old. The first time I heard the term human trafficking was in 2007. I was in a meeting, very similar to a Rotary meeting that you are all familiar with, sitting at a lunch eating buffet prime rib. And the guest speaker came up to talk about these horrible things that were happening to children in Cambodia and Thailand. That guest speaker was Rotarian, and their mission at the time was to start teaching people in the community about human trafficking. And while I sat there listening to her describe these horrible things that were happening to children in all these faraway places, all I could help but keep thinking to myself was, but wait, that's what happened to me. And I had two thoughts in that instance. The first was relief, because I finally had a name for what had happened to me, and if it had a name, that meant I wasn't alone. But the second was anger, because what had happened to me had a name, and that meant I wasn't alone. So at that point in my life, I really started a new direction, and that same woman, that same Rotarian, and a group of other women really rallied around me and said, you know, what can we do to help you? What do you need? And I said, I want to go back to school. I want to be able to help other people. And they said, well, what do you need to do that? What do you need to go back to school? And I had been I was currently still in a domestic violence situation with a husband who did not want me to go to college. And I was like, there's no way he'll pay. I can't afford it. I want to go to community college. It's going to be like $500 to go to community college for the semester, and I can't afford that at all. And one of these women essentially took out a blank check and was like, go take whatever classes, buy whatever books you need, and you know, do whatever you can to get to follow your passions. And that $500 was the first step into becoming the first person in my family to not only get an associate's degree, but then become the first person in my family to ever get a bachelor's. Now I have a master's degree, and if it wasn't for COVID, I'd hopefully be starting my PhD program pretty soon. But as was mentioned in my introduction, I've seen a lot through both my personal and my professional experiences. I've known 9-year-olds that I've seen pulled out of motel rooms in towns of only 400 people. And I've sat with 60-year-olds still working the streets, comforting them after they've been raped once again. I've pulled girls naked out of the snow, and I've met pimps who have been the biggest attorneys in their communities. I've worked with women who have been sex slaves in Sierra Leone and women who are pimped through the legal brothels of Nevada. I've lost count on the number of funerals and memorials I've organized and attended. But during this time, I've learned one thing that is universal across the sex trade. There may not always be a pimp, but there is always a buyer. You see, society has conditioned through movies, news, laws, and awareness campaigns to despise the pimp, to despise the trafficker. But your pimp's name doesn't have to be Daddy, Mac, Hoff, or Madam. Your pimp's name can be poverty, homelessness, single motherhood, student loans, disability, domestic violence, or even trauma. Today, you will walk out of your doors with a new understanding of what sex trafficking is in America, how it affects the lives of those around you, and empowered to make an immediate impact in your community. In order to truly understand sex trafficking in the United States, you must first recognize that society's current understanding is completely wrong. Second, how there is an intersectionality between the experiences of those most marginalized in our community and sex trafficking. And finally, how other countries across the globe are flipping the power dynamic on its head and empowering victims to finally walk away from their abusers and their situations and away from the lifestyle while still holding abusers accountable. Because when poverty is your pimp, choice is an illusion. So let's get started. If when you think about sex trafficking in America, you think about the movie Taken and Liam Neeson, but you don't think about the movie Pretty Woman and Julia Roberts, then you have a misguided understanding of what sex trafficking really is, and you need to pay attention. In order to truly understand sex trafficking in the United States, you must first recognize that our understanding of what we've been taught is completely wrong. Do y'all remember back when TVs used to get all wonky and distorted, and if you were my dad, you had to hit it a couple times to make it adjust the picture? That's how the picture of sex trafficking is in our mind. It's wonky. It's distorted. It's not the way that it should be. There's this one picture that so many of us see, whether it be in awareness campaigns or on billboards, sometimes in airports. This picture, or one's very similar to it. This young girl, hands all dirty, eyes wide open. And you see, when I was growing up, when I would hear about human trafficking, this is the picture I would see. This is the image that I would see. These are the things that we were told. We were told about women in basements and kidnappings and these horrible things that were happening. But I wasn't dirty. And I wasn't in a basement. I wasn't chained up. My mouth wasn't duct taped. I was taken, but I was home for dinner every night with my family. And it was images like this that made it to where I didn't even know I was a victim. And it's images like this that keep women and children today from knowing that they're even victims. There's all these other images that are constantly used by campaigns and government agencies that we as survivor leaders around the country are trying to get people to realize the damage that this is doing. That the images we used 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago need to be changed, need to be adjusted. Because what sex trafficking looks like, images that we should be looking at, the things that people should be registering need to be adjusted. Society has it all wrong. These are the pictures of what sex trafficking really looks like in our country. Single moms, young moms, teen moms, poor moms, undereducated moms. This photo in the middle, that's me when I was 11. That's when my victimization started. Started online, moved offline. I was trafficked beginning at 11 up to when I was 14. My parents had no idea. I had great, amazing parents. My dad was law enforcement, worked the night shift, so he was asleep during the day. My mom worked multiple jobs because law enforcement doesn't pay well. So in those hours between 3 when I got out of school and 6 when my mom got home for dinner, my dad would wake up at 6 and go to work. His shift started at 7. Those 3 hours, a neighbor was able to exploit me. Then you have women who have experienced disability, racism, food insecurity, poverty, trying to pay for college, all these things that many of us take for granted. And end up in the lifestyle. Not because there's a big mean pimp or trafficker. Not that does happen, of course. But are told if you don't have a gun to your head, if you don't have someone that's tying you up and putting you in a basement, then it's your fault. There's something wrong with you. You're the criminal. Instead of saying, what got you here? Why are you here? What's happening? Only when you can recognize the various phases of sex trafficking, both those of children and adults, can you truly help those in your community. So now that you understand the picture of sex trafficking in society and why the picture in our mind society has created is wrong, let's move on to what it really looks like and how it is affecting those around you. Think back to the story I shared when I first learned I was being trafficked, when that Rotarian shared with me about Cambodia and Thailand, and I had that aha moment. What about that story was it that led me to that aha moment? I made a connection between what was being told to me and what had happened to me. What people don't realize is with sex trafficking, all forms of trauma and abuse are connected. You see, in our society, sex trafficking looks like a dad checking his daughter out of school repeatedly for doctor's visits, when what he actually is doing is taking her down to the local motel and pimping her out. It's a teenage boy who's been kicked out from his home for coming out to his parents and being propositioned by an older man to take care of him in exchange for sex. It's a single mom working at a strip club and being coerced into providing backroom extra services to keep food on her children's stomachs or to keep herself in college. It's those most marginalized in our society, those with disabilities, experiencing homelessness, poverty, single motherhood, addiction, racism, coming out of foster care, those that are LGBTQ, and more, that are told that they're not worth more, that they should subject themselves to regular sexual violence, physical, mental, and emotional abuse, increased exposure to STDs or even COVID to meet their basic needs: food, shelter, health care. For so long, we've had one image and one word we've used: prostitute. That label, that term we use, we put on someone and say, this is who they are. They've made this choice. They've made this decision. This is something they've chosen to do. I'm in Nevada. I'm in Las Vegas. People here especially argue with that and say, well, what if the woman chooses this lifestyle without taking into consideration that most likely it's the choice of those with the fewest choices. Instead of someone being a prostitute, of that being their identity, of that being their soul, if that's who they are, they're most likely being prostituted by someone, which is what we identify as trafficking. Or they're prostituting. It's something they're doing as a means to an end. It's to feed an addiction. It's to put food on their table. It's to get out of a domestic violence situation. It's in order to get a college degree. It's to put a roof over their head because they came out of foster care most of the time. And finally, the largest contributor of sex trafficking victims, which is usually a co-contributor to one of the other things I've discussed, is, well, what do y'all think it is? In the chat, what do you think is something that most victims, I would say all, 99.99% have in common, aside from one of the other things I've listed? What is something that most of them have in common? Lack of self-esteem, 100% sexual abuse. So we've got low self-esteem, lack of self-esteem, longing for acceptance and belonging, sexual abuse, lack of power, vulnerability. Those are all really good answers. Poverty. Trauma. Trauma, and trauma comes in lots of forms. Trauma could be the death of a parent. Trauma can be some sort of accident, some sort of sickness themselves. But Betty Jo got it pretty close on the head. Most of the time, it's some form of sexual abuse. You know, we hear a lot of times in awareness campaigns that the average age of entry into prostitution in the United States is, we get different numbers, 12 to 14, 14 to 16 years old, around there, somewhere in that term. What we don't talk about is that the average age of exploitation, not of entry, but the average age of those being exploited is actually college age. And that's because, you know, we think about what we talk about with college age. We say, Oh, she's just putting herself through college. Oh, she has daddy issues. Oh, she's looking for a sugar daddy. Things like this, right? We make these excuses, these little sayings that we just kind of excuse that behavior without looking at the deeper meaning behind it. And a lot of times it's trauma. And again, going back to that, the idea of choice. When I left my ex-husband after years of domestic violence and found myself sleeping in my car, I thought I had a choice. When I was sexually assaulted and strangled in my own home and had to leave my job because I ended up in a 60-day residential treatment program for suicidal ideation, I thought I had a choice. You see, in the times in my life when I was scared about having a roof over my head or hungry because I hadn't eaten in 3 days, I thought I had a choice. Because when I was 11 years old, I learned that I could get on my knees for a man and make enough money to feed myself. So I could choose to make that money and feed myself. Now, there's no normal way to react to an abnormal situation. But the fact is that I knew, and most of the time, girls and those in the lifestyle know that they're going to be sexually assaulted, they're going to be abused, they're going to be choked out, they're going to be hurt in the lifestyle. But that's better than the unknown of, what if I end up homeless? What if I don't get to eat for another few days? What if I have to go back to my abusive partner? What if I lose my children? What if? Think about it this way. Imagine you're walking down the street and someone comes up to you and they spit on your shoe. That's pretty disgusting, right? You probably probably shoo your shoe away or maybe wipe it off. What if they spit on your shirt? Ugh, wipe it off, clean it off. What if they spit on your face? Probably get a disinfectant and face wash and clean it really good. Now, what if they spit in your mouth? Some people would take mouthwash and rinse their mouth out real well, clean it, get that clean feeling. Other people put gum in it, chew gum, put different foods in their mouth and drink different things and try to get different tastes in their mouth to clean it out. Now imagine someone violates your body in the most intrusive way. Some women and men and non-binary individuals take a shower, clean it off. Others, like myself, try to take control, try to control what gets put inside of it. Control the input, put different things inside so I can have control of what's inside my body. Get that feeling of that spit, that person that I didn't want in there out. By taking control of what is in there. Over and over and over again, what we hear with victims is exactly what I would say. At least I can control who is in my body. At least it's not my stepdad this time. At least I'm not homeless. At least I'm getting something out of it this time. At least. Another way of saying it is, if nothing else. Because that's what trauma does. It makes us believe we have nothing else. That we are worth nothing else. Only when society not only begins to tell us what we are worth, that we are worth more, but begins to put laws and social services in place that say the same thing, can we really begin to stop sex trafficking in the United States. So we call it the abolitionist model, also known as the equality model, the Nordic model. Around the world, countries have begun recognizing the inherent harms of the sex trade and adopting the abolitionist model, which criminalizes the purchase of sexual services, but decriminalizes those within the systems of prostitution. Think about it this way. When the police get called to a domestic violence situation, the goal is for them to arrest the person that's abusing the victim, not to arrest the victim. Currently, in America's laws, police show up and 99% of the time arrest the person that's being prostituted or is prostituting, and not the person buying or selling the person. So the goal of the abolitionist model is to reverse that, to where we don't arrest the victim, we don't arrest the person being abused, we arrest the perpetrators. This approach recognizes the systems of trafficking and prostitution are largely driven by demand and targets buyers rather than those who are being prostituted. Evidence shows legalizing prostitution results in more trafficking and increased numbers of women and girls exploited and prostituted. For example, Denmark versus Sweden. Denmark has a population of a little over 5 million people. Sweden has a population of 10 million people. Anyone want to guess the difference between the two countries? In Denmark, prostitution is legal. Denmark, that almost has half the population of Sweden, has 10 times the number of people being prostituted as Sweden does. 10 times the number with half the population, because they legalize prostitution. It makes it very hard for law enforcement to find the victim when things are legalized. Versus Sweden that brought in the Nordic model and arrest the perpetrators rather than victims. Five main points, go through these really quickly. 5 main points of what the abolition model does. 1, repeals laws calling for the arrest and incarceration of people being prostituted or prostituting. Stop arresting the victim. 2, provide comprehensive trauma-informed social services, legal, social, clinical, medical, to people in prostitution, including options that they wish to exit the trade. Basically what this says is provide them with services, social services, and say, hey, we're here for you. When you choose to come out, when you are ready to come out, here are options for you. Just like with domestic violence, we can't force them to leave, but when you're ready, here are the things to help you. Studies show time and time again, that's when more victims will come out, is when they're given the option, but not forced. Reduce the demand for prostitution by penalizing sex buyers. Arrest the Johns. This shrinks the sex trade and prevents more vulnerable people from being brought in. 4, continue to criminalize pimps and traffickers, brothel owners, and illicit massage parlor owners. A lot of times you'll see people who are quote unquote sex workers or pro-sex work say, you have to quit. You can't not arrest us and still arrest the pimps. You have to not arrest them as well. Well, who do you think is telling them to say that? And 5, you have to have a community-wide education plan to raise awareness so that the community is on board with the plan. The community has to be on board or none of anything else works. Finally, survivor leaders and allied organizations around the country are working hard to shift the image of sex trafficking around the country and empower community leaders like yourselves and Rotarians like my wonderful friend Leanne, that's her right there, to help lead and change the fight in your community. It starts with you. Started with Leanne showing up to a meeting, Seroptimist, if you know what that is, and giving a presentation on human trafficking. Through that, now I have worked on writing, sponsoring, and advocating almost, at this point, almost 100 laws around the country to help victim rights pertaining to violence against women and children. I'm going to open it up to questions at this point. I do ask that you please note, I do not answer questions. A lot of times people get curious about specifics about my abuse. I don't answer specifics about my abuse just for my own mental health reasons and not wanting to have flashbacks and PTSD issues, nor do I answer specific questions on abusers for the same reason. I try to do this in a healthy way. And although I go to counseling on a regular basis, repeatedly talking about specifics is not a healthy thing for me. So Claire, I will open it up to you, and if you got some questions, we can go from there. Oh, I think you're still muted, Claire.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. As you have questions, please put them in the chat and I will bring them to Kimberly. And while you're doing that, I would mention, boy, some of these stories that you told, Kimberly, really run parallel to some of the stories in the work that I've been doing. We just opened a new shelter in the Northeast area of the Twin Cities. And one of the stories that came up was our director, this is called Amberella House. Our director got a call the week before last from a woman in Duluth calling for this young lady who was being pimped by her mother. And she, as she was talking to our directors, asking, you know, can we get her into the facility, and the young lady disappeared. They still have not found her. And apparently it was a very dangerous situation, but the police are looking for her to help get her out of this situation. So some of these stories are really true and terrible. And so our first question, how do I get, Kathy Hewitt, how do I get to the list of, because these are coming in so fast and I only see one at a time.
You can open your chat box
Okay.
and then you'll be able to see the questions.
Okay, here we go. Nina Potter, do you think politically motivated conspiracy groups like QAnon are harmful or helpful to your cause?
Oh, harmful, harmful. It's not just those, although that one gives all of us survivors just a headache beyond all belief. It's the things like the Wayfair conspiracy theory of like Wayfair selling children in cabinets online, or even when you see Facebook postings of I was at Target shopping and a man was following me and he was going to sex traffic me. And no, he was not going to sex traffic you. He may was going to rob you, but he was not going to sex traffic you. So in the last 5 years, there have been hundreds of thousands of victims of sex trafficking in the United States that have reached out for services. But there have been approximately 5 reported cases that had some sort of kidnapping, abduction component. And those, for the most part, still had a relationship with the person. So this whole stranger kidnaps someone to traffic them is false in the United States for the most part. Less than 5 out of hundreds of thousands. So anytime someone shares anything like that, it's that back to that narrative of, the dirty and the in basements and the chains and all that. It's all the same thing. So anytime we have people sharing false narratives or, celebrities are all trafficking children and something in their blood. I've had people with that one pretty much harass me online asking if, people stole my blood as a child and things all like that and wouldn't leave me alone, which you can only imagine what that does to me emotionally for a few days trying to get rid of them. So it's definitely very harmful. It's harmful to survivors. It's harmful for the mission. It's harmful for just the cause overall.
Thank you. Abby Thalaker asked, what are some key components to processing through the trauma you experienced? You mentioned counseling. Is there anything else that is helping you?
Meds, counseling, definitely. As I mentioned, I did so I was sexually assaulted as an adult twice as well. And the last time I had a real bad bout with suicidal ideation, had to go to treatment for 60 days. And that really helped me a lot because I learned a lot of self-coping skills and a lot of self-care and CBD training or therapy and things to that extent, a little bit more in-depth therapy related to trauma and specifically PTSD and CPTSD. And so a lot of it is medication, counseling, and self-care, and also limiting. So I'm a public speaker, so what I do for a living, but I do limit my talks. I limit my talks. I limit how often I talk. And as you can see, I take steps now to also put things I don't talk about on different parts of my talk. So that way I kind of control a lot more of where my mind goes. Hopefully to just try to keep myself in a healthier mindset.
Okay. Bob McLean asks, how do we educate young boys and men on the demand side and the impact it has on victims?
So there's a couple different things. One, if it's your own child, speak to them. Here in Nevada, it's sad that, we have legalized brothels and it's kind of a rite of passage here for Nevadan boys to go. It's kind of seen as that. And so it's something that we really have to educate young men on, what consent is, and that consent cannot be bought. That's exactly the definition, is consent cannot be bought. And so we really have to educate men on that. And then there's programs. So you have Shared Hope International, some other really great national programs that have programs designed for men or groups designed for men that try to give men a role in this movement, because a lot of times men feel awkward in this movement, or what do we do? Or, we don't want to step on toes or anything. And so really giving them a voice and a way to help and to be a part of it without, having to have that awkward of, well, I can't really work with victims. I can't really, take a big step into this kind of sphere. And so there are lots of different ways to get involved in that route, but a lot of it's just having conversations and uncomfortable conversations, and really just teaching teaching your young men that you have an influence in your life with, and hopefully also educating your community and your neighbors so they can do the same with theirs.
Okay. I'd also follow up that with in Minnesota here, and I think it may be broader than Minnesota, but we have an organization called Men as Peacemakers, which is all about retraining, allowing men to rethink how they are thinking about sex, so that they are not doing the kinds of things that.
And that's part of Breaking Free? Is that part
no,
of
they're a separate organization.
Okay.
But yeah. Stephanie Cosgrove asked, what are next step actions that we can do to help stop trafficking?
Well, it depends on what step you're at now. Usually with Rotary, one thing I'm starting to talk to a lot of Rotary groups around the country. And one thing I'm really, trying to, I don't say push, but really trying to get people involved with is one thing that's really lacking in our country is education in schools. So California and Utah both have passed legislation that requires education on human trafficking in every 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, and 11th grade. And they are required to train every teacher and administrator on trafficking. And then each student in those grade levels has to take a class, 1 day a year on the subject matter. Kind of think like Red Ribbon Week back in the day on human trafficking. And those became state laws in those states. And so it mandated what that criteria be. What we have now across the country is, unfortunately, a lot of, little programs or a lot of like churches or things that have kind of, talked to the school board or whatever and gotten little programs in their schools. And most of the time they're not the most trauma informed, they're not the most current up-to-date information, and they're not most professional, they're not the most well put together. And so trying to get survivor-informed, trauma-informed information in the schools in a structured program that's statewide in every state is kind of my goal, my next goal. And I'm hoping that, Rotarians are really big, I know, on children and on education and in your communities, and trying to make sure that your schools and your school districts are really understanding that there is not one school in this country, unless it's, maybe if it has 10 students in it or less, that isn't affected by this. Not one. I guarantee you. I don't care if it's a private school that you're paying $50,000 a year to send your child to, or it is the poorest of poor public school in the country. Every school is affected somehow by sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation of children. And so we have to get these education programs in school. Just think of, like, I was trafficked from 6th to right to 9th grade. And my parents had no idea. I didn't understand what was happening to me. And think about if there had been education in my school, what I would have known, what I would have learned. Unfortunately, most of the time with kids, it's a family member or family friend that's trafficking them, or exploiting them. So you can't count on the parents educating them. You have to do it in a format to where, when most of the time it's a family member trafficking a child or a foster parent or something to that extent, you have to put it in the schools so that kid has the ability to be exposed to, oh, this isn't right. Oh, I can get help. And make sure it's in a way that's appropriate for each grade level. So that's what I would love to see. I think that's something that Rotary everywhere can work towards. And that's something that hopefully across the country, we can start seeing more and more of every year.
And we are seeing that here in Minnesota too, that more schools are getting involved. And as you mentioned, it's really important that first of all, the staff members in our educational institutions get trained so that they're able to look for it and help those kids. We also have the Minnesota Health Department that is promoting one training a program to go into schools. if you're interested in that, you can contact me and I can get you the information on it. I also want to mention, before we go on here, that our next Friday's feature is kind of hits in this area again, as it is a workshop for ethics teams. So we just want to make sure that you're looking to see the announcement on that and get registered for that. Let's see here if we've got some more. We do. Anita Jader asks, so because some prostitution is legal in Las Vegas, are there more victims of trafficking instead of actually a choice?
Well, actually, prostitution is not legal in Vegas, contrary to popular belief. It is actually very illegal in Las Vegas. Prostitution is legal in licensed brothels in counties of fewer than 100,000 people in Nevada, which does not include Las Vegas. So you have to go about an hour outside of Las Vegas to encounter a legal brothel. And during COVID, there are none that are open. So again, you do not have women leaving well-established lives to come and prostitute out of Nevada brothels. I've worked with women who are foster care kids who had one while I was helping her move from one brothel to another because, you know, we help them. We just try to be there from wherever we can. Said, you know, basically, like, you know, at least this time it's not my, you know, this time at least it's not my dad doing this to me, you know. So that was her excuse of, not excuse, but her way of being okay with being here. So the average pay that a prostituted person makes in a brothel in Nevada is $24,000 a year before expenses, because they have to pay for their everything out of that. So it is very much something that they count on those that come from situations that have the fewest choices to fill those roles. Those that are doing very well and very successful are very privileged, and those are usually the voices you hear. And they're also the ones that are usually probably also making money off the lower end ones as well. So take that for what you will. So it's very much a backwards world. We do have some really good things coming this way, and hopefully it will not be a thing very soon here in Nevada if things go well in the next few months. We have a federal court case coming up in the Federal Court of Appeals in December, trying to close the brothels. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. Kathy Hewitt and Kimberly, how's our time?
We are coming to a close. So for the hour. So Ed
Okay.
Merrick.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Kimberly, for joining us today and sharing your experiences and knowledge, and keep up the great work you're doing. And I might mention, for some of you that came on later, Kimberly let us know that she is going to be joining a Rotary Club out in Las Vegas. So welcome to the family of Rotary, Kimberly. That's wonderful news. And as you can see, we're all interested in making changes in the world and making it a better place. So we'll be right there with you working on this. One thing I'd like to announce is next time on October 30th at 9 a.m., our Friday feature will feature Stella Center, who is the Deputy Director of Wallen Education Partners. You can learn about her educational journey and the impact of the program. She was an ambassadorial scholar with Rotary back in the day, so another Rotary connection to the speaker. And then on, I want to mention the ethics team is hosting a presentation workshop on Braver Angels initiative with malice toward none. Rotary International General Secretary and CEO said of this program, I'm supporting the With Malice Toward None initiative by Braver Angels. I encourage civic leaders everywhere to join and get involved. Prior Lake Rotarian Rick Olson will be joined by Braver Angels volunteer Bruce McKinsey on Thursday, October 29th at 7 p.m. to present this important information. Watch for registration information. It'll be coming out next week. You'll need to register for this online event. And that's what I've got. And I think we can, again, thank you, Kimberly, and probably close this session up.